Hello learners, this is the 10th unit of the course MGPE 009 in which we shall be discussing Gandhian perspectives on cultural diversities. I'm Dr. Shubhangi Vaidya. The aims and objectives of this lecture are basically to try and understand the concept and the meaning of culture and of cultural diversity. We shall also try and understand and appreciate India's cultural diversity. And then we shall discuss how interfaith dialogues and assimilation are linked to diversity and how to accommodate diversities in this context. Let's begin with a very simple question. What does the term culture mean? Culture is a term that has multiple meanings and connotations and whose use varies across disciplines. In our ordinary understanding, we use the term culture to denote the arts, aesthetics, refinement, education, etc. For instance, we may say that a person X is a very cultured person, meaning that she or he is well educated, has very refined and graceful manners, appreciates the fine things of life, and so on. But in the context of the social sciences, culture is something that is possessed by every member of society. It is something which is learned and transmitted from generation to generation. In other words, to be human is to have culture. All human beings learn culture as members of society. Culture consists of both material as well as non-material aspects. Basically, it covers all the ways of thinking, behaving, acting, our customs, morals, rituals, beliefs, etc., which we learn as human beings, as members of society. The contemporary world is marked by cultural diversity. Almost every country in the world has cultural diversity. There are very, very few places left on the globe in which we can say that there is only one particular kind of a culture. Due to migration, due to globalization, people have taken their cultures across the length and breadth of the world to different parts of the world. India, as you know, is one of the most diverse, plural, multicultural nations of the world. India has immense ethnic, regional, linguistic, and religious diversity. All the world religions are represented in India. Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and so on. All the major religions of the world and so many tribal or animistic religions are also found in India. We find that tribal, rural, urban, and metropolitan lifestyles also have their own unique cultures or ways of living, right from the forest dwellers in the remote, dense jungles, to the peasantry in the villages, to city dwellers in the towns and cities. There is an enormous variety of lifestyles, of food habits, dressing styles, customs and traditions, festivals and celebrations, which give India its vibrant and heterogeneous character. The immense heterogeneity and plural character of India was recognized and acknowledged by the political leadership and the framers of our constitution, while deliberating a framework that would provide for an amalgamated yet culturally a diverse nation state that is based on the principle of unity in diversity. When we talk about India after it attained freedom and attempted to carve out a national identity, we have to take on board, or we have to reckon with the religious and cultural diversities that have been a part of Indian history right from antiquity, since pre-colonial times. Speaking of the national movement, we see that it was the national movement that sought ways to accommodate these diversities towards a common cause. And this common cause was liberation from a foreign power. Now, this was indeed a struggle, because to bring so many diverse communities, so many diverse ways of thinking, so many diverse ways of believing under one common umbrella for a common cause, this was really the genius of our leaders of the national movement. It was a struggle for acquiring a national identity, and it sought to unify the groups belonging to various religious and cultural groups within a nationalist fold. While many cultural diverse groups were jointly and gradually consolidated on a nationalist platform, we also see, and history has shown us, how sharp differences also emerged during the course of the national movement on communal lines. The issues of Hindus and Muslims increasingly got polarized and got projected as being opposites or antithetical towards each other. This was one of the very, very important and difficult challenges that Gandhiji was constantly engaged with during the course of the national movement. Unfortunately, as you know, despite his best efforts, with freedom also came partition on communal lines. And this was one of the great, great consequences or fallouts of the national movement, which had tried very hard to integrate and to assimilate the different communities under a common banner. Let's now discuss in greater detail about Gandhi's views on religion and cultural diversity. In the previous lecture on Unit 9, we had discussed in detail Gandhi's views on religion and Gandhi's views on secularism. While we will repeat some of these facts in greater detail in this particular lecture, we'll also examine the issue of culture. We find that Gandhi considered religion as an integral part of the cultural structures of society. So in a way, we can say that it is rather difficult to separate religious beliefs and cultural practices. Gandhiji often used religious idioms for conveying his social and political messages, as these made sense to most Indians, as this resonated with their cultural moorings. So Gandhi spoke to the people in their own language, on their own terms, using concepts, using values, using ideas that drew from religion, that drew from cultural practices. And that is why these made sense, or these had a resonance with the general population. And his ideas also showed the way in which deep, genuine religious beliefs could also be combined with genuine belief in cultural diversity and a multicultural democracy. This really reflects the genius of Gandhi. We are all leaves of a majestic tree whose trunk cannot be shaken off its roots, which are deep down in the bowels of the earth. So this beautiful quotation really conveys the unity and at the same time the immense diversity that characterizes our nation and our culture. Gandhi believed that pluralism and cultural diversity, based upon equality of space for each culture, leads to a composite oneness. And this really is the test of a composite culture. So he did not believe in placing each diversity in little compartments. He believed in an engagement, in a kind of deep engagement, which led to a composite and a unified kind of an identity emerging. He stated in Hind Swaraj that India cannot cease to be one nation because people belonging to different religions live in it. And this is a fact that cannot be disputed. As you know, Gandhi himself was a staunch Hindu. However, he believed that different faiths represented different paths towards truth. So even though he was very, very firm in his own personal faith, he had the largeness of heart and the largeness of vision to accept and to acknowledge that all religious paths try to attempt or try to gain or try to access a common truth. He believed that religions are different roads converging on the same point. He also maintained that the religion that he considered the source of value was not Hinduism or any other known religion, but one that transcended or went above all of them, the religion of truth, reason, and morality. And he did not name this religion, but one could describe this as a universal, spiritual, and humanistic religion that has in itself or encompasses within itself the principles of truth, of reason, and of morality. Let's talk about a very important concept, namely Gandhi's participatory pluralism. What do we mean by this? Now, Gandhi definitely acknowledged the enormous influence of the moral content of various religions. For instance, if you look at Christianity, Gandhi acknowledged that Christianity, as depicted in the Sermon on the Mount, had a profound impact on his own thinking. And he declared that Jesus has given a definition of perfect dharma. He also considered Islam as being very, very important in the making of India's national culture because of its emphasis upon the oneness of God and the brotherhood of all human beings. Gandhi's moral sensibilities, as is very well documented, were also deeply influenced by the tenets of Jainism, and the biographies and other studies on Gandhi definitely bring this point out. His participatory pluralism is crucial towards a true symbiosis and mutual respect for diversities, as it seeks to engage with these diversities rather than insulate itself. So Gandhi, while acknowledging the impact of other religious systems on his own thinking, also actively engaged with them to try and really practice pluralism, to really participate in the entire enterprise of carving a plural and composite identity. As he said in Now Khali to a small group of people, I am a Hindu, a Muslim, a Sikh, and so are you all. He called for a Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian unity that was tied to the concept of truth as ultimate and one. And as we have repeated several times in the past, he envisioned a non-violent society in which all decisions were based on consensus, arrived at by rational discussion, in which each strove to look at the subject in question from the standpoint of others. So basically looking at issues from the standpoint of the other, of having the moral breadth and depth and wisdom to be able to look at things from the perspective of the other. Let's talk now about a very, very important aspect of Gandhi's practice, and that was his firm belief in interfaith dialogues. His inclusive philosophy, like we've mentioned, was not just an acceptance or a passive acceptance of religious and cultural diversity, but rather a very well-reasoned and active engagement with it. He always examined and reflected about other positions, as well as engaged in very critical self-reflection of his own position on various issues. For him, dialogue was the key, and paths towards transformation and alternative thinking were always kept open. He was deeply concerned, as we've mentioned before, about the issue of religious conflict and how to achieve Hindu-Muslim unity, and was also engaged with the quest on how to achieve interreligious dialogue in a multi-religious setting like India. This is a particular challenge, getting people with entirely different ways of believing and thinking to engage with each other, to talk to each other, to discuss with each other. An interreligious transformative dialogue is only possible with goodwill and respect for other religions, which is an essential feature of religious pluralism. So the basic belief is that all religions are worthy of being listened to, of being engaged with, rather than a very, very hard stance that only my religion is the right one and everybody else's is wrong or is in some way not appropriate. And the acceptance of freedom to interpret one's own truths while accepting the possibility of the truths of others lies at the core of tolerance. And this is a lesson from Gandhi that is so very, very relevant in the contemporary times. Gandhi acknowledged that religion provokes certain very intense passions, and these can be divisive. But he was absolutely certain that this is not a part of the religion. This is something that can be reformed. For him, there is truth in every religion. However, none represents the absolute truth. All religions represent a relative truth because culture remains the point of reference for every religious belief, and this influences the different points of view. So it's very important to note that every religion has a local, historical, and cultural bias or basis. And since no religion is perfect, according to Gandhi, in representing the truth, it benefits from a dialogue with others. Such a dialogue gives us access to the great treasures of other religions and cultures. It sensitizes us to the very different ways in which human beings try to make sense of the world, and thus to the very rich diversity of human thought and practice. Gandhi's plea for interreligious dialogue, understanding, and goodwill was socially oriented, stood on pluralistic grounds, and was made possible because of the common concerns of different religions, which he firmly believed in. All interpretations are mediated by human beings and communicated in inherently inadequate human languages, which are articulated in particular historical and cultural contexts. And these are bound to be partial and limited. And therefore, religions and cultures are not rivals, but rather they are partners sharing fundamental interests. Just as a preservation of one's own culture does not mean contempt for that of others, but requires assimilation of the best that there may be in all the other cultures. Even so should be the case with religion. I quote from Iyer. Let's talk now about Gandhi's perspective on the assimilation of cultures. He stated that no culture can live, no culture can survive if it attempts to be exclusive. Only if cultures blend with each other with utmost freedom can they benefit from interaction with each other. And the preservation of one's own culture should not mean contempt or destruction of the other. Cultural diversity and the growth of different cultures, in fact, enriches human existence. And hence, cultures should rejoice in each other's presence and progress. So rather than being in competition, or rather than trying to weed each other or destroy each other, cultures should be in constant engagement and participate in each other's existence and activities. Gandhi's very famous quote bears mention in this context. To quote, "I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any." And this highly quoted statement of Gandhi indicates his firm belief of the integrity of his own culture, as well as his immense openness to influences from other cultures, from outside cultures. Let's now talk about how this has impacted India's approach of unity in diversity. As we've mentioned earlier, after attaining independence, establishment of a democratic political order in India was a very major achievement. And one of the basic leading principles of this was that of inclusion of all and exclusion of none. So as we see in the Constitution, everyone is given a place, everyone has an equal place and an equal right. And accommodation and assimilation, rather than homogenizing differences, is at the very heart of this enterprise of unity in diversity. So the identity of the new nation state has to be reconciled with the existence and the flourishing of culturally diverse groups. And this is actually a great experiment in nation building that we should be very justifiably extremely proud of. At the same time, we do see that identities of language, religion, caste, and tribe have been used and appealed to increasingly for the mobilization of political support. So cultural bases or cultural identities have been used for gaining political capital. And we find that these diversities have acquired a very sharp political presence and have often become instruments of adversarial or conflict-ridden politics. In order to make a political claim, cultural identities have often been created or revived. And we can call this the politics of cultural diversity. We see that historically, community identities predate our identity as political citizens of India. Indians see themselves first and foremost as members of a caste, a tribe, a village, a religion, and so on. And these community identities constitute people's self-understanding and shape their social and political choices. Unfortunately, we see that social and political conflicts around the issues of religion, caste, tribe, ethnicity, etc. are very much present and are a part of politics in the Indian context. Ethnic, religious, and linguistic identity assertion, the continued role of caste in identity politics, all these are factors that do play a part in undermining India's democratic polity. Let us conclude by looking at the relevance of Gandhi in this situation in which identity politics threatens to undermine unity and diversity and political democracy. We find that Gandhi's thoughts and actions are significant, relevant, and urgently needed for addressing problems of the 21st century, as Allen put it, not just in the context of India, but in a global context. His philosophy addresses the need to empathize with and understand the religious, philosophical, ethical, cultural, economic, and political views of others, including those who we may consider as irrational, immoral, or threatening. And these very values of pluralism, inclusiveness, tolerance, empathy, compassion, non-violence, and respect for the diverse approaches and cultures of others are really the need of the hour. We see that the contemporary world is besieged by religious, political, economic, and cultural divisions and conflicts. These are further intensified by anti-pluralist, exclusivist views, intolerance, ethnocentrism, lack of respect, and contempt for diverse approaches of others. Gandhian ideas and Gandhian political practice certainly show us the way, but they also demand a commitment to the cause of truth and the readiness to face the challenges that this brings. Thank you.